Liam, I want a divorce, Adeline said coldly, as she walked into our penthouse overlooking downtown Portland.
Alexander.
Needs me now, and I can't keep pretending this marriage means anything anymore. My wife, the CEO of Marino Tech Industries, had just asked me to help save her first love's failing restaurant, chained with a $2 million loan from our joint savings money. I had worked 15 years to build through my consulting firm. I had agreed, thinking I was supporting my wife's business instincts. But as I stared at the divorce papers she slid across our marble countertop, realized I had just funded my own replacement. Alexander Patel, her college boyfriend, who had reappeared 6 months ago, claiming his restaurant empire was collapsing, wasn't just a business investment. He was her escape plan. I, like a fool, had paid for it. Little did Adeline know that her decision to abandon our marriage for her first love would cost her everything she had worked to build, and I would be the one collecting the debt. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in our Portland penthouse. I was reviewing quarterly reports for my consulting firm, Garcia Strategic Solutions, when Adeline burst through the front door with an energy I hadn't seen in months. Her designer heels clicked against the imported Italian marble as she approached my home office. Her perfectly styled auburn hair slightly disheveled from the October wind. "Liam, I need to talk to you about something important," she said, her green eyes sparkling with an excitement that immediately made me suspicious. In our 8 years of marriage, Adeline Marino had never been one for spontaneous conversations about anything that didn't involve quarterly projections or board meetings. I set down my tablet and gave her my full attention. "What's going on? You look like you just closed the Microsoft deal early." "It's better than that," she said, settling into the leather chair across from my desk. "Remember Alexander Patel, my friend from Stanford Business School?" The name hit me like a punch to the gut, though I tried not to show it. Of course I remembered Alexander. He was the ghost that had haunted our early years of marriage, the brilliant entrepreneur she would mention whenever she'd had a few glasses of wine, the one she'd dated for 3 years before we met, whose restaurant concept had been revolutionary, and whose business acumen she'd praised endlessly until I'd finally asked her to stop. "What about him?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Restaurant chain Patel's Kitchen Collective is in trouble. Really serious trouble. He called me last week for advice. And Liam, the numbers are devastating. He's about to lose everything. 12 locations across Oregon and Washington, over. 300 employees about to lose their jobs." I leaned back in my chair, studying my wife's face. The concern in her voice seemed genuine, but there was something else there, something that made my chest tighten with unease. "That's unfortunate," I said slowly. "But what does that have to do with us?" Adeline's eyes lit up with the same fervor she displayed when presenting to Marino Tech's board of directors. "I think we can save him, not just as a favor but as a smart investment. His locations are prime real estate, downtown Seattle, Pearl District here in Portland, Bellingham waterfront. The concept is solid, it's just over-leveraged and undercapitalized." "Adeline," I interrupted, "are you suggesting we invest in Alexander's restaurants?" "Not invest. Exactly, more like provide bridge financing. $2 million to restructure his debt and modernize his operations. With my experience turning around struggling divisions at Marino Tech and your consulting expertise, we could help him rebuild into something really spectacular." $2 million? The number hung in the air between us like a loaded weapon. That money represented 15 years of grinding work, building my consulting practice from nothing. 18-hour days, weekend flights, 2 client sites, missing. Vacations and anniversaries to close deals and build relationships. Every dollar earned through helping other companies optimize their operations while I slowly, methodically built our future. $2 million, I repeated, from our joint savings. "It's just sitting there, earning minimal returns," Adeline said, her voice taking on the persuasive tone she used with reluctant investors. "This could turn into 10 million within 5 years if we play it right. Alexander has always been brilliant. With food concepts and customer experience, he just needs capital and guidance." I stared at my wife, searching her face for something I couldn't quite name. When exactly did Alexander call you last week? Wednesday, I think. She waved her hand dismissively. Does it matter? The point is, we have an opportunity to help. Someone who really needs it while making a smart financial move. Wednesday. That was the same day she'd come home 2 hours late from dinner with the Marino tech board, claiming they'd had extended discussions about the quarterly review. The same day I'd noticed she'd changed her clothes and redone her makeup before coming upstairs. And you've been thinking about this for a week without mentioning it to me. I wanted to do my due diligence first, she said, though her eyes didn't quite meet mine. Look, I know $2 million sounds like a lot, but think about it rationally. We have $4 million in savings. This represents exactly half of liquid assets that are currently doing nothing for us. Those liquid assets are our security, I said, feeling my temperature rise. They're our emergency fund, our retirement preparation, our safety net. They're the result of me working 70-hour weeks for over a decade while you built Marino Tech. While I built Marino Tech, Adeline's voice sharpened. Liam, I think you're forgetting that my salary and bonuses have contributed significantly to that savings account too. It was true, but it stung anyway. Adeline's income as CEO had indeed grown to match and then exceed mine over the past 3 years. But those early years when she was climbing the corporate ladder and I was building my practice from scratch, I had been the primary breadwinner. I had been the one taking financial risks and making sacrifices. I'm not forgetting anything, I said carefully. I'm just saying that $2 million isn't a decision we should make lightly, especially not for someone we barely know anymore. Barely know. Adeline stood up abruptly, her composure cracking slightly. Alexander and I have kept in touch. Over the years, he's not some stranger, Liam. He's someone who meant a lot to me once, and he's in trouble. There it was. The truth beneath all the talk of smart investments and business opportunities. This wasn't about financial returns or strategic positioning. This was about Alexander Patel, the man who had held my wife's heart before I did, and apparently still held pieces of it now. How often have you two been keeping in touch? I asked. That's not. It doesn't matter, Adeline said, but her cheeks flushed pink. What matters is that someone is about to lose everything, and we have the power to help. Isn't that what marriage is supposed to be about? Supporting each other's decisions and being there for people who matter to us? People who matter to us, I repeated, or people who matter to you. Adeline's jaw tightened. I thought you were more generous than this. Liam, I thought you were the kind of man who would want to help someone in need, especially when it makes good business sense. And there was the manipulation, wrapped in disappointment and moral superiority. The suggestion that refusing to hand over $2 million to her ex-boyfriend made me selfish and small. The implication that a truly good husband would enthusiastically fund his wife's connection to another man. I looked at Adeline standing there in her designer business suit, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming impatiently against her Hermes handbag, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. This woman, who hadn't shown genuine excitement about anything involving our marriage in months, was practically vibrating with energy about saving Alexander Patel. Fine, I said finally. If this is really about business, then let's treat it like business. I want to see his books, his current debt structure, his operating expenses, and a detailed repayment plan. I want collateral agreements and personal guarantees. I want this structured like a real loan with real terms, not a gift to an old friend. Adeline's smile was brilliant and grateful, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course, Alexander will be so relieved. I'll set up a meeting for this weekend so you can review everything together. As she leaned down to kiss my cheek, I caught a whiff of unfamiliar cologne clinging to her hair. Not her usual Chanel perfume, but something masculine and woody that definitely didn't belong to me. Thank you, Liam, she whispered against my ear. This means everything to me. That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had just agreed to finance my own betrayal. The meeting with Alexander Patel took place 3 days later at his flagship restaurant in Portland's Pearl District. As I walked through the doors of Patel's Kitchen Collective, I had to admit, the space was impressive. Exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and an open kitchen concept that allowed diners to watch the culinary theater unfold. Even at 2 in the afternoon, the place buzzed with energy. buzzed with energy. Alexander emerged from the kitchen area, and I immediately understood why Adeline had been so smitten with him in college. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of easy charisma that made people lean in when he spoke. He moved through his restaurant, like he owned not just the building, but the entire block. "Liam," he called out, extending a hand with a $1,000,000 smile. "Finally, Adeline has told me so much about you. Thank you for coming." I shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the way his eyes held mine just a beat too long. This was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let's sit. Alexander gestured toward a corner booth. "I've prepared everything you requested. Financial statements, debt analysis, projected revenue streams. You're going to love what we can build together." For the next 2 hours, Alexander walked me through numbers that painted a picture of spectacular mismanagement disguised as ambitious expansion. He'd leveraged his first 3 successful locations to open 9 more in 18 months, taking on massive debt and overextending his operational capacity. Labor costs were spiraling, food waste was astronomical, and several locations were hemorrhaging money. The problem, Alexander explained with the confidence of someone who'd never been wrong about anything, is that I expanded too quickly for the market to catch up. But with proper capitalization and strategic guidance, we can turn this around. Within 6 months, these numbers show you're losing almost $30,000 per month, I said, pointing to the spreadsheet. That's $360,000 annually, just in operational losses, not counting debt service. Temporary growing pains? Alexander waved dismissively. Every successful business goes through this phase. I looked up from the documents too, find him staring at something behind me. Turning, I saw Adeline entering the restaurant, and the expression on Alexander's face made my blood run cold. It was hunger, pure and simple. Look of a man seeing something he wanted and intended. To have Adeline? Alexander stood immediately, his whole demeanor transforming. Gone was the businessman trying to convince an investor. This was something much more intimate. "You look incredible." My wife approached our table with a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Her hair was down instead of in its usual business chignon, and she'd changed from her office attire into a flowing dress that accentuated her figure. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sliding into the booth next to Alexander instead of beside me. The Morrison Industries call ran long. "Problem at all," Alexander said, his hand briefly touching hers on the table. "Liam and I were just discussing the beautiful future we're going to build." I watched this interaction with growing unease. The casual touch, the way they positioned themselves, the fact that Adeline had changed clothes and styled her hair for this business meeting, it all pointed to something that had nothing to do with restaurant financing. "So what do you think?" Adeline asked me, though her eyes remained focused on Alexander. "Isn't this exactly the kind of opportunity we've been looking for?" "The numbers are concerning," I said carefully. "Alexander, you're essentially asking us to subsidize operational losses for an indeterminate period while hoping market conditions improve. That's not investment, that's charity." Alexander's jaw tightened slightly, but his smile never wavered. "I prefer to think of it as vision, Liam. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money. Sometimes you have to cut losses to survive," I countered. "Your downtown Seattle location alone is bleeding $15,000 a month. Your Bellingham waterfront lease is 60% above market rate. You have inventory management issues, staffing inefficiencies, and a cost structure that's fundamentally unsustainable." "Those are exactly the kinds of problems Liam specializes in solving," Adeline interjected quickly. "His consulting firm has turned around dozens of struggling operations." Alexander nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. That's why this partnership is perfect. Your expertise, Adeline's business acumen, and my culinary vision, we'd be unstoppable." Partnership. The word hung in the air like a threat. This wasn't about a loan anymore. This was about creating an ongoing business relationship that would keep Adeline and Alexander connected indefinitely. "I need to think about this," I said, closing the folder of financial documents. $2 million is a significant commitment. Of course, Alexander said, though his tone had cooled noticeably. Though I should mention that I have other potential investors interested. I'd hate to see this opportunity slip away. It was a bluff, and we all knew it. If Alexander had other viable funding sources, he wouldn't be courting a loan from his ex-girlfriend's husband. But the threat was clear. Agree to the terms, or risk losing Adeline's favor. Liam, Adeline said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Can I speak with you privately for a moment? We stepped outside onto the sidewalk, where the October air carried the scent of rain and fallen leaves. Adeline turned to face me, and I saw something in her expression that made my stomach drop. What's really going on here? I asked. What do you mean? I mean, this isn't about business, is it? This is about Alexander. Adeline's composure cracked slightly. You're being paranoid. Not because the way you two look at each other, the way you touch each other, the way you've completely transformed yourself for this meeting, none of that has anything to do with restaurant financing. You're imagining things, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. When did you start seeing him again? I asked quietly. For a moment, Adeline looked like she might confess everything. Her green eyes filled with something that might have been guilt, or regret, or simply frustration at being caught. Then her expression hardened. Not having this conversation, she said. Alexander's an old friend who needs help, and we have the means to provide it. You can't see the business opportunity here. Maybe the problem isn't with the investment. Maybe the problem is with the investor, I said. What's that supposed to mean? It means maybe the problem is that you're not investing in a restaurant. You're investing in a relationship. Adeline's face flushed with anger. How dare you suggest that I would what? Have an affair? Prioritize your ex-boyfriend over your husband? Use our savings to fund your escape from our marriage? The silence that followed was deafening. Cars passed on the street, people walked by laughing and talking, but between Adeline and me, there was nothing but the sound of 8 years of marriage crumbling. I want to help Alexander, she said finally. With or without your support, and if I refuse? Adeline looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, and utterly without love. Then I'll find another way. As we walked back into the restaurant, I realized that my marriage was over. The only question was whether I would pay $2 million for the privilege of watching it die. I agreed to the loan. Looking back, it seems like madness, but in that moment, sitting across from Alexander and Adeline as they planned their future together, I couldn't see any other choice. Refusing would only accelerate whatever was happening between them. At least this way, I told myself, I'd have some control. Over the situation, the money transferred on a Friday. By Monday morning, everything had changed. Liam, we need to talk. I looked up from my laptop to find Adeline standing in the doorway of my office. But this wasn't the same woman who'd pleaded for Alexander's loan just 4 days ago. This Adeline was different, colder, more resolved, like someone who'd finally made a decision she'd been avoiding for months. About what? I asked, though the sinking feeling in my stomach told me I already knew. She walked across the room and placed a manila envelope on my desk. I want a divorce. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting them. Just like that. It's not just like that, and you know it. Adeline sat down across from me, her posture perfect, her expression businesslike. We've been growing apart for over a year. You know it. I know it. And pretending otherwise isn't helping. Either of us. Growing apart? I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? What else would you call it? I'd call it you having an affair with Alexander Patel. Adeline's jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. My relationship with Alexander is separate from our marriage problems. Your relationship with Alexander? I said slowly. So you admit. There is a relationship. We've reconnected. Yes. But that's not why I want a divorce. I want a divorce because we're not happy, Liam. Neither of us. The audacity of it was breathtaking. She was rewriting our entire marriage history to justify her betrayal, casting herself as the victim of an unhappy union rather than the perpetrator of infidelity. We weren't happy, I said, so you decided to start screwing your ex-boyfriend? Don't be crude, she snapped, the first crack in her composed facade. This isn't about sex. It's about connection, about finding someone who understands my ambitions and supports my goals. I've supported your goals for 8 years, supported them with my time, my energy, and apparently my money. You've tolerated my goals, Adeline? Corrected. There's a difference. Alexander believes in my vision for the future. He sees me as a partner, not just a wife. Not just a wife. A partner, I said. Is that what you call someone who takes $2 million of your money and then steals your wife? Adeline's eyes flashed with anger. He didn't steal anything. And that money was an investment in both our futures. Futures? Which are you referring to? She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked downtown Portland. Alexander needs me, Liam. His business, his dreams, his entire life is hanging by a thread. I can't abandon him now. But you can abandon me. You'll be fine, she said without turning around. You've always been fine. Your consulting business is successful. You have your routines, your systems. You don't need me the way Alexander does. And there it was. The truth beneath all the rationalizations and justifications. Alexander needed her, and I was merely convenient. Alexander was struggling, and I was stable. Alexander represented excitement and possibility, while I represented security and predictability. So this is about playing savior, I said. You want to rescue Alexander, and I'm just the banker funding the operation? Adeline turned back to face me. I want to be with someone who makes me feel alive again, someone who challenges me and inspires me to be better, someone who requires constant financial support and emotional management, someone who appreciates what I have to offer. I leaned back in my chair, studying my wife's face. 8 years of marriage, and I was finally seeing her. Clearly, not the brilliant CEO I'd fallen in love with, but a woman who needed to be needed, who confused drama with passion and dependency with love. What about Marino Tech? I asked. Are you planning to run your company from Alexander's restaurant? Kitchen. I can manage Marino Tech from anywhere, she said confidently. The beauty of being CEO is that you delegate operations and focus on strategy. And what's your strategy for explaining to your board of directors why you're suddenly working? Remotely while your husband files for divorce? You're not filing for divorce, Adeline said. I am. She opened the manila envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers. I've already spoken to my attorney. These are the preliminary documents. Stared at the papers without touching them. Let me guess. Want the penthouse? Half of my business assets? And ongoing spousal support while you play house with Alexander? I want what's fair, she said. The penthouse is jointly owned, so I'm entitled to half its value. Your consulting business was built during our marriage, so I have a claim to its assets. And yes, I'm seeking spousal support to maintain my standard of living during the transition. The transition to what? Being Alexander's sugar mama? Transition to my new life, she said coldly, with or without your cooperation. I picked up the divorce papers and flipped through them, my attorney's training from law school kicking in as I scanned the terms. What I saw made my blood boil. Adeline wasn't just asking for half of everything. She was demanding the majority of our shared assets while taking on none of the debts. She wanted to keep her Marino Tech stock options, claim half of my consulting business, and receive $5,000 monthly in spousal support. But what really caught my attention was a single line. Buried on page 12, petitioner acknowledges that $2 million in marital funds was recently invested in Patel's kitchen, collective as a joint business venture. A joint business venture, I read aloud. Is that what we're calling it now? That money was invested with both our names on the documents, Adeline said. Legally, it's a marital asset. It's an asset that you gifted to your boyfriend. It's an asset that will generate returns for both of us. I set the papers down and looked at my wife. Really looked at her. Perfectly styled hair, the designer clothes, the manicured nails, the confident posture. Everything about her screamed success and control. But underneath it all, I could see something else now. Desperation, fear, the anxiety of someone who'd made a massive gamble and was trying to convince herself it would pay off. Alexander's restaurants are failing, I said quietly. You know that, right? Even with our $2 million, even with your guidance, the fundamentals don't work. You're not investing in a business, Adeline. You're subsidizing a fantasy. You're wrong, she said, but I heard the uncertainty in her voice. Am I? Because I've spent the last 4 days doing my own analysis of his operations. The Seattle location alone needs another $500,000 just to break even. The Bellingham lease is a disaster. His food costs are spiraling because he refuses to standardize portions, and his management team is either incompetent or actively stealing from him. Adeline's face had gone pale. Those are fixable problems. Maybe, but fixing them will cost more money than we have, and more time than Alexander's creditors are willing to give him. You're not saving a viable business, Adeline. You're throwing good money after bad. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've saved dozens of companies from bankruptcy, and I've watched dozens more fail because their owners couldn't accept reality. Alexander Patel isn't a visionary entrepreneur who just needs capital. He's a dreamer who's gotten in over his head. For a moment, doubt flickered across Adeline's features. Then her expression hardened again. It doesn't matter, she said. Needs me, and I'm going to be there for him. Sign the papers, Liam. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I stood up slowly, the divorce documents still in my hand. You know what? You're right. Shouldn't make this harder than it has to be. Adeline blinked, clearly not expecting me to concede so easily. You'll sign? I'll sign, I said. But not these papers. What do you mean? I walked over to my desk and pulled out a business card from my drawer. I mean, I'm calling my own attorney and my own forensic accountant, my own private investigator. Liam, what are you doing? I'm protecting my interests, I said calmly. You want to play hardball? Let's play hardball. You want to treat our marriage like a business transaction? Fine. But you're about to learn the difference between a CEO and an entrepreneur. What's that supposed to mean? I smiled for the first time since she'd walked into my office. It means you're used to having a board of directors and a legal department, and a team of accountants managing risk for you. But I've been building businesses from scratch for 15 years. I know how to fight dirty when I have to. Adeline stared at me, and for the first time since she'd announced her intention to divorce me, I saw fear in her eyes. You can't stop me from leaving, she said. I'm not going to stop you from leaving, I replied. I'm going to make sure you pay for the privilege. As Adeline stormed out of my office, I reached for my phone. It was time to make some calls. If my wife thought she could steal my money, destroy my marriage, and walk away with half of everything I'd built, she was about to learn just how wrong she could be. The game was changing, and for the first time in months, I was going to be the one making the rules. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years of marriage. I called in sick to work and spent the day planning Adeline's destruction. My first call was to Patricia Wells, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Portland. Patricia had a reputation for turning messy divorces into financial massacres, and her retainer fee alone was enough to make most people reconsider their legal strategy. But after listening to my situation for 20 minutes, she quoted me a price that made me smile. Mr. Garcia, she said in her crisp voice, your wife has made several critical errors. First, she's documented the affair by including Alexander's business as a marital asset. Second, she's used marital funds to benefit her paramour. Third, she's attempted to hide assets while making unreasonable demands. This is going to be fun. My second call was to David Chen, a forensic accountant who specialized in tracing hidden assets and financial misconduct. Need you to dig into businesses, I told him. Marino Tech Industries and Patel's Kitchen Collective. I want to know every financial transaction, every expense account, every business trip, every dollar that's moved between them in the past 6 months. Looking for anything specific? David asked. Embezzlement, fraud, misuse of corporate funds, tax evasion, anything that shows my wife has been using her position at Marino Tech to benefit her boyfriend's failing restaurants. While David worked his magic with financial records, I made my third call to Maria Santos, a private investigator who'd helped me gather evidence for several corporate fraud cases. I need surveillance on 2 people, I explained, giving her Adeline and Alexander's details. I want photos, videos, financial transactions, travel records, and detailed documentation of their relationship timeline. But my most important call was to someone Adeline would never expect, her own assistant, Jennifer Kim. "Mr. Garcia?" Jennifer sounded surprised when she answered. "Is everything okay?" "Mrs. Marino said you were feeling unwell." "I'm fine, Jennifer. I was wondering if you might have time for coffee today. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." An hour later, Jennifer sat across from me at a small cafe in downtown Portland, her expression nervous but curious. I'd always liked Jennifer. She was smart, hardworking, and had been increasingly frustrated with Adeline's erratic behavior over the past few months. "Jennifer, I'm going to be direct with you," I said. "Adeline and I are getting divorced, and I have reason to believe she's been using Marino tech resources inappropriately. I'm not asking you to betray her, but I am asking you to think about your own career and legal exposure." Jennifer's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if Adeline has been using company funds or resources to support Alexander Patel's restaurants, and if the Marino Tech Board discovers this during their annual audit, there could be serious consequences for everyone involved, including her assistant, who processes her expenses." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee absently. "The restaurant consultations?" she said finally. "What about them?" "Mrs. Marino has been billing Marino Tech for restaurant consultations over the past 3 months," she said. "They were potential acquisition targets, but she never filed any reports or recommendations with the board." I felt a surge of satisfaction. "How much in consulting fees?" $47,000 so far, plus travel expenses to Seattle and Bellingham. "Jennifer, I want you to make copies of all those expense reports and billing documents. Tonight, after Adeline leaves the office, can you do that?" Jennifer nodded slowly. "Mr. Garcia, I've been wondering if I should look for another job anyway. Mrs. Marino has been ... different lately. Distracted, secretive, sometimes not coming in until noon." "That's probably wise," I said. "And Jennifer, when the board starts asking questions about those restaurant consultations, make sure you have documentation showing you followed proper procedures and question nothing that seemed unusual." As Jennifer left the cafe, I felt the pieces of my plan beginning to fall into place. Adeline thought she held all the cards because she was the CEO, because she had the money and the power and the prestigious title. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I was the one who'd taught her how to read financial statements. I was the one who'd showed her how to structure deals and analyze risk. And now I was going to use every lesson I'd ever given her to take her apart piece by piece. By the time I returned home that evening, Adeline had already moved into the guest bedroom. She barely looked up when I entered the penthouse, too absorbed in her laptop screen to acknowledge my presence. "Working late?" I asked pleasantly. "Crisis management," she said without looking up. "One of Alexander's suppliers is threatening to cut off deliveries unless he pays his outstanding balance." "How much does he owe? 80,000? God, it's just a cash flow issue. Once we implement the restructuring plan, everything will stabilize." I nodded sympathetically, even as I mentally added another item to my growing list of Alexander's debts. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. You always do." Adeline finally looked up at me, her expression slightly suspicious. "You're being very calm about all this. What's the point of fighting the inevitable?" I said with a shrug. "You've made your choice. I just want to get through this divorce as amicably as possible." "Really?" "Life's too short to spend it battling over things that don't matter anymore." Adeline's relief was palpable. Expected a fight, threats, desperate attempts to change her mind. Instead, she was getting cooperation and understanding. Exactly what I wanted her to think. As I headed to my own bedroom, I allowed myself a small smile. Tomorrow, Patricia Wells would file my response to Adeline's divorce petition. David Chen would deliver his preliminary financial analysis. Maria Santos would begin her surveillance. And Jennifer Kim would start documenting every questionable expense and suspicious transaction. Adeline. I thought she was playing chess, but she was actually playing checkers. And I was about to show her the difference between the two games. 3 weeks later, the dominoes began to fall. It started with a phone call from David Chen on a Thursday morning. "Liam, you need to see this immediately. I found something that's going to change everything." David's report was devastating. Over the past 6 months, Adeline had charged $127,000 in consultation fees to Marino Tech for what she claimed were potential restaurant acquisitions, but the real revelation was in the travel records. She'd been flying to Seattle every weekend for 3 months, staying at the Four Seasons, dining at expensive restaurants, all billed as business expenses, while she was actually conducting her affair with Alexander. "But here's the smoking gun," David continued, sliding another document. Across his desk, she authorized a $50,000 consulting contract between Marino Tech and something called Hospitality Solutions, LLC. "Want to guess who owns that company?" "Alexander Patel," I said. Bingo. She literally used her corporate authority to funnel money from her company to her boyfriend's fake consulting firm. And the best part? There's no record of any actual consulting work being performed. By Friday afternoon, Maria Santos had delivered her surveillance report. Photos of Adeline and Alexander together at romantic dinners, walking hand in hand through Pike Place Market, entering and leaving his Seattle apartment. But the most damaging evidence was a video of them at a real estate office, looking at waterfront properties in Bellingham. "They're house hunting," Maria explained. "Apparently planning to buy a $1.2 million property overlooking the bay. Your wife even put down a $50,000 earnest money deposit from her personal account. Meanwhile, Patricia Wells had been busy filing motions and subpoenas. The Marino Tech Board received our discovery request this morning," she told me with barely contained glee. "I suspect they're going to be very interested in your wife's expense reports." That evening, Adeline came home in a fury. "What the hell did you do?" she demanded, storming into my office. "The board is demanding a full audit of my expenses. They've suspended my access to corporate accounts pending review." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said calmly, not looking up from my laptop. "That sounds stressful. Don't play innocent with me. This has your fingerprints all over it." "Adeline, I have no control over Marino Tech's internal audit procedures. If they're questioning your expenses, maybe you should talk to your attorney." Her face had gone pale. "Liam, you don't understand. If they find irregularities, I could lose my job. I could face criminal charges. Then I hope you kept proper documentation for all your business expenses." For the first time since she'd asked for the divorce, I saw real fear in Adeline's eyes. The confident CEO facade was cracking, revealing the desperate woman underneath. But the worst was yet to come. Alexander called her while she was standing in my office. I could hear his panicked voice through the phone speaker. "Adeline, we have a problem. 3 more suppliers cut us off today. The bank is demanding immediate repayment of the equipment loans. My landlord in Seattle is threatening eviction for non-payment of rent." "How is that possible?" Adeline asked. "We just injected $2 million 3 weeks ago." "The money's gone," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "The debt was worse than I told you. Much worse. Yeah. We need at least another $1 million just to stay afloat." I watched my wife's face as she processed this information. The realization that Alexander had lied to her, that the restaurants were unsalvageable, that she'd sacrificed everything for a fantasy. "What about the hospitality solutions consulting contract?" she asked desperately. "That's frozen too," Alexander replied. "Something about an investigation into unauthorized payments." After Alexander hung up, Adeline slumped into the chair across from my desk. For several minutes, she said nothing, just stared at her hands while the magnitude of her situation sank. "I could go to prison," she whispered finally. "Yes," I said simply. "You could. And Alexander. He lied to me about how bad things were. Yes, he did." Adeline looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Liam, I made a terrible mistake. Is there any way we can fix this?" I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, studying the woman who had betrayed our marriage for a man who had betrayed her in return. "That," I said quietly, "depends on what you're willing to give up to save yourself." The game was almost over, and finally Adeline was beginning to understand the rules. 6 months later, I was reviewing the quarterly reports for my expanded consulting firm when my assistant buzzed the intercom. "Mr. Garcia, there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." I looked up to see Adeline standing in my office doorway, but she was barely recognizable. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect hair. Instead, she wore a simple black dress that had seen better days, her hair pulled back in a plain ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. "Hello, Liam," she said quietly. "Adeline?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Please, sit." She perched on the edge of the chair like she was ready to flee at any moment. "I wanted to thank you. Thank me. For the plea bargain. Your testimony helped convince the prosecutor to offer probation instead of prison time." It was true. The criminal charges had finally been filed against Adeline for embezzlement and fraud. I'd testified about her cooperation in recovering the stolen funds. It was more mercy than she deserved, but I wasn't a vindictive man. "How's Alexander?" I asked. Adeline's face crumpled. "He disappeared 3 months ago, right after the bankruptcy filing. Apparently, he'd been running a similar scheme with 2 other women, one in San Francisco, another in Vancouver. The FBI is still looking for him. I nodded. Alexander Patel had turned out to be exactly what I'd suspected. A professional con artist who specialized in seducing successful women and then bleeding them dry. Adeline had just been his latest mark. "I've lost everything," she continued. "My job, my stock options, my reputation, the condo, the cars, even my jewelry, all sold to pay back what I stole from Marino Tech." "I'm sorry to hear that, are you?" she asked, searching my face. "Or is this exactly what you wanted?" I considered the question seriously. "I wanted justice, Adeline. I wanted you to face consequences for your choices. But I never wanted to see you destroyed. The difference being that you still have a chance to rebuild your life. You're smart, talented, and you're only 34 years old. This doesn't have to be the end of your story." Tears started flowing down her cheeks. "I miss you," she whispered. "I miss us. I know I don't deserve it, but is there any possibility that we could try again, that you could forgive me?" I leaned back in my chair, studying the woman who had once been my wife. The woman who had betrayed our marriage for a fantasy, who had stolen from her own company, who had thrown away everything we'd built together for a man who had never loved her at all. "No," I said gently. "There isn't, Liam. Please, Adeline. You made your choice when you decided that Alexander was more important than our marriage. You made it again when you stole from your company to fund his failing businesses. And you made it a third time when you tried to take half of everything I'd earned while you were planning your new life with another man." I was confused. I made mistakes? You weren't confused, I interrupted. You were selfish. You wanted excitement and drama and the thrill of being needed by someone desperate. You confused dysfunction with passion and dependency with love. Adeline sobbed quietly for several minutes while I waited. Finally, she looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you rebuild," I said. "You find a job, you work hard, you pay your debts, and you learn to be alone. Until you figure out who you really are outside of a relationship. And you?" I smiled, thinking of Charlotte Taylor, the brilliant marketing director I'd been dating for the past 2 months. Someone who was independent, honest, and actually available. "I'm doing well," I said simply. "Very well," for Adeline. Left, I returned to my reports with a sense of closure I hadn't felt in years. The divorce was final, the criminal cases resolved, and the business was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. Several former Marino Tech clients had followed me after the scandal broke, pressed by my integrity throughout the ordeal. Just as I reflected wasn't about revenge, it was about consequences matching choices. Adeline had chosen betrayal and got betrayal in return. She'd chosen deception and had been deceived. She'd chosen to risk everything for a fantasy and had lost everything real. As for me, I'd chosen to fight smart instead of fighting angry. I'd chosen truth over revenge, justice over destruction, and I'd chosen to build something better from the ashes of what I'd lost. Sometimes, that's the greatest victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. so you don't miss any upload from us.